In this village, people feared the oracle more than death. They warned her not to question the oracle. They begged her not to cross the shrine. But she laughed and took what no woman had ever touched. What happened next changed the village forever.
You are watching Folklore by Chisholm, where every story carries a warning. Listen carefully and never ignore the signs.
No one in Umuaku village remembered the time when the oracle was questioned aloud. Its presence was older than the oldest tree at the village square, older than the red earth paths that wound through mud houses and farmlands. Children grew up hearing its name spoken in lowered voices, as though respect itself had a sound. When the oracle spoke through its chief priest, the village listened, not because of fear alone, but because history had taught them that some warnings arrived before danger did. That was why the laughter startled everyone. It came sharp and clear, slicing through the quiet of the village assembly like a blade. All heads turned. Standing at the center of the square was Nkiru, tall, composed, city-dressed, her eyes steady and unafraid. She had returned to Umuaku only a week earlier, yet already her presence unsettled the elders. Education had changed her voice. The city had hardened her confidence. And now she was laughing at the oracle's warning. The chief priest had not raised his voice. He never did. His words were calm, measured, heavy with tradition as he announced that certain paths remained forbidden, certain customs unchanged. Among them was a reminder that no woman was permitted to enter the sacred shrine, rules handed down long before any living soul was born. Nkiru stepped forward. "Is it tradition?" she asked, her voice echoing, "or is it convenience?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. She spoke again, louder this time. She questioned why village girls were promised into marriages they did not choose, why women were barred from sacred spaces, why decisions that shaped everyone's lives were always sealed by men. "And you say the oracle supports this?" she finished. The square fell silent. The chief priest's gaze met hers. There was no anger in his eyes, only caution. "Some traditions," he said slowly, "exist to protect balance." Nkiru smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Or to protect power," she replied. That night, while Umuaku slept, Nkiru did what no woman had dared to imagine. She walked alone toward the shrine. The moon was thin, the forest unusually quiet. Each step carried her deeper into forbidden ground, past carved stones and ancestral markings she had been taught never to touch. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with defiance. Inside the shrine, the wooden oracle stood where it always had, silent, ancient, watching. Nkiru reached out. Her fingers closed around the idol. Nothing thundered. No wind rose. No voice spoke. She lifted it and walked away. At dawn, Umuaku awoke to an unthinkable sight. Nkiru stood in the village square, holding the oracle aloft. "This," she declared, "is what you fear." The chief priest stepped forward for the first time since the challenge began. And in his silence, something unseen shifted. Because the oracle had not been mocked, it had been moved. And balance, once disturbed, never returned quietly. The moment Nkiru raised the wooden oracle above her head, Umuaku stopped breathing. No one shouted. No one rushed her. Even the children, who moments earlier had been playing near the square, froze where they stood, eyes wide with a fear they did not yet understand. The oracle had never been carried into the open like this. It was not the idol itself that terrified the people. It was what the act represented. Boundaries had been crossed. Lines drawn by generations had been stepped over without hesitation. Nkiru scanned the crowd, her grip firm, her expression unyielding. "Look at it," she said, her voice steady. "You bow to this. You allow it to decide who marries your daughters, who speaks, who is silent, and yet it cannot even speak for itself." A low murmur spread through the elders. Some looked away. Others stared at the ground. A few glanced toward the chief priest waiting. He stood apart, his white robe unmoving in the early morning breeze. His face revealed nothing. No anger, no shock, only restraint. "You have done enough," one elder finally said, rising slowly. "Return what does not belong to you." Nkiru turned toward him. "Belong?" she echoed. "Does it belong to the ancestors or to the men who interpret its silence?" That was when the chief priest spoke. "Careful," he said quietly. The word carried weight. Not threat, not command, but warning. Nkiru stepped closer to him, closing the distance the village had always respected. "Tell them," she demanded. "Tell them why women cannot enter the shrine. Tell them why girls are promised before they understand love. Tell them why men make decisions that shape everyone's future." For the first time, the chief priest's eyes hardened. These matters are not resolved through theft and spectacle. Tradition is not overturned by humiliation. Nkiru laughed softly. "Then let it defend itself," she said, lifting the idol again. That night, the village did not sleep. Whispers moved faster than footsteps. Some praised Nkiru's courage, others warned that she had invited consequences no education could explain away. Mothers held their children closer. Elders gathered in hushed groups, debating whether this was rebellion or something far more dangerous. By morning, the changes began. Nkiru woke with a headache she could not explain. The sounds of the village felt distant, as though she were listening from underwater. When she spoke, people avoided her gaze, not out of hatred, but discomfort. Later that day, she tried to confront the chief priest again. She found him at the edge of the sacred grove, standing alone. "I am not afraid," she broke the silence. "I know," he replied. That unsettled her more than anger would have. "You think this proves something, that removing symbols removes meaning, but you have not destroyed belief, you have disturbed alignment." Nkiru scoffed, yet something in his tone lingered. That evening, she dreamed of paths that twisted endlessly, of voices calling her name without faces. She woke before dawn, her confidence shaken for the first time. Outside, the village drums began to sound, slow, deliberate, summoning elders for a meeting that did not include her. And as Nkiru watched from a distance, a thought crept into her mind, unwanted and persistent. What if challenging power was not the same as understanding it? By the third day, Umuaku no longer felt like home to Nkiru. The village paths she had walked since childhood now seemed unfamiliar, as though the earth itself had shifted slightly beneath her feet. Conversations stopped when she approached. Doors that once opened easily now closed with quiet politeness. No one insulted her. No one confronted her. That silence was heavier than anger. Nkiru told herself it was resistance, nothing more. Change, she believed, always unsettled those who benefited from the old order. Yet, even she could not ignore what was happening to her. Her sleep had grown shallow and restless. When she closed her eyes, she saw the sacred grove, not as it was, but as it had been long ago. Fires burned where none existed now. Figures moved through the shadows, their faces hidden, their presence pressing in on her chest. She woke each time before dawn, her heart racing, her palms damp. During the day, strange lapses followed her. She misplaced objects she had just held. She lost her way walking paths she knew blindfolded as a child. Once, at the stream, she caught her reflection and flinched, not because it looked different, but because it felt unfamiliar, as if she were looking at someone else wearing her face.
The elders noticed. So did Mama Udo, the oldest woman in Umuaku, whose memory stretched further than most men's pride. She sent for Nkiru quietly. When Nkiru arrived, she expected accusation. Instead, Mama Udo offered her a stool and a long, searching look. "You have courage," the old woman said at last, "but courage without patience often walks ahead of wisdom." Nkiru stiffened. "Are you here to defend them too?" Mama Udo shook her head slowly. "I am here to tell you what the oracle truly is and what it is not." She explained that the oracle was never meant to silence women or excuse injustice. It was a symbol, one that bound memory, ancestors, and consequence together. When misused by men, it could become a tool of control, but when mocked and violated, it responded not with punishment, but imbalance. You did not steal wood, you disrupted meaning. That night, the village gathered again, this time without drums. The chief priest spoke at last, not to condemn Nkiru, but to reveal what few remembered. Long ago, women had roles within sacred rites. Over time, fear and convenience narrowed tradition, not wisdom. Reform was possible, but only through restoration, not desecration. Nkiru listened from the edge of the crowd, torn between vindication and unease. Her protest had revealed truth, but her method had fractured something deeper. Later, alone in her room, she stared at the wooden idol resting where she had hidden it. For the first time since taking it, she felt no triumph, only weight. A question formed in her mind, soft but relentless. What if proving tradition wrong was never the same as proving yourself right? Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere between the old grove and the silent square, Umuaku waited, patiently, for what Nkiru would do next.
The night Nkiru decided to return the oracle was not one of fear. It was a night of realization. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the earth cool and the air heavy with the scent of wet soil. The village was unusually quiet, as though Umuaku itself was holding its breath. Nkiru sat alone in her father's old room, the wooden idol placed before her on the floor. For days, she had carried it like a trophy. Now it felt like a burden. She thought of the girls she had spoken for, girls promised into marriages they never chose. She thought of the shrine barred to women. She thought of the chief priest's calm restraint and Mama Udo's warning. She had been right to question power, but she had been wrong to mock meaning. Outside, footsteps approached. It was Obina, a childhood friend who had avoided her since the incident. He did not sit when he entered. "The elders are divided," he said quietly. "Some want you banished. Others believe this moment can change everything." Nkiru looked up sharply. "Change rarely comes without disruption," she replied. "Yes," Obina said, "but disruption without direction becomes destruction." That was when she stood. Before dawn, Nkiru walked toward the sacred grove, not defiantly this time, but deliberately. Word had spread quickly. Elders followed at a distance. Women gathered silently. Even children watched from doorways. The chief priest was already there. He did not stop her. At the shrine entrance, Nkiru knelt for the first time since her return to Umuaku. Slowly, she placed the oracle back where it had stood for generations. "I do not apologize for asking questions," she said aloud, "but I accept that I crossed a boundary without understanding it." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The chief priest stepped forward. "Tradition survives, not because it cannot be questioned, but because it can be corrected." He announced what stunned everyone. A council would be formed, men and women, to revisit customs that had drifted from their original purpose. The shrine will remain sacred, but its rules will no longer hide behind silence. Not everyone agreed. Some elders walked away in protest. Some men whispered in anger. But something irreversible had begun. That night, Nkiru slept without dreams for the first time since the challenge began. Yet peace did not come easily, because change, once invited, demands sacrifice. And Umuaku was only beginning to reckon with what had been awakened.
The change Nkiru had helped awaken did not arrive gently. It came with resistance. By the 5th morning, Umuaku felt divided in a way it never had before. The market was quieter. People gathered in smaller groups, voices low, eyes cautious. Old alliances shifted. Long-held respect was questioned. And beneath it all was a growing fear, not of the oracle, but of what the village might become if its foundations were re-examined. Nkiru felt it most clearly when she was summoned before the elders. This time, the gathering was not ceremonial, it was tense. Some elders sat rigidly, their faces hardened by pride and anxiety. Others looked weary, caught between preserving order and admitting long-avoided truths. The chief priest stood at the center, silent as ever. "You have gone too far," one elder said bluntly. "You have encouraged disobedience." "I encouraged questioning," Nkiru replied calmly. "There is a difference." And now families argue, women refuse arrangements, young men speak out of turn. Is this progress? The question hung in the air. The chief priest finally raised his hand. "Truth," he said slowly, "often arrives before peace." That answer satisfied no one. By the evening, the backlash took form. A planned marriage was postponed publicly. A young woman refused to accept a union decided without her voice. Her family blamed Nkiru. Angry words followed her through the paths. Once, a stone landed near her feet, not thrown directly, but deliberately close. Obina warned her to leave the village for a while. "You have started something bigger than you," he said urgently. "They will make you the symbol of everything they fear." Nkiru shook her head. "If I leave now, the message becomes weakness." That night, she paid the price. Someone set fire to the small storehouse her father once used. The flames were controlled quickly, but the warning was unmistakable. No accusation was made, no apology offered. Fear finally reached her. Not fear of spirits, fear of people protecting power. The chief priest visited her before dawn. "You must understand that reform demands sacrifice, sometimes from the one who speaks first." Nkiru met his eyes. "I am willing, but do not let this become a performance where truth is applauded and then abandoned." The following day, the council made a decision that shocked everyone. Nkiru would leave Umuaku, not in exile, but in responsibility. She would return to the city and speak of what she had learned, not with contempt, but with context. The council, meanwhile, would begin reforms slowly, carefully from within. It was not the victory she imagined, but it was not defeat either. As she packed her belongings, women came again, quietly. This time, they did not thank her. They asked her to remember them. Nkiru understood then. Change does not always allow you to stay and enjoy its fruits. Sometimes, it asks you to plant and walk away. As she left Umuaku, the oracle remained where it had always been, but the silence around it had changed forever.
Years later, Umuaku was no longer spoken of in whispers, not because it had abandoned its traditions, but because it had learned how to hold them without suffocating those who lived within them. Change did not arrive quickly, it never does, but it arrived deliberately. After Nkiru left, the council she helped provoke did not dissolve as many had expected. At first, meetings were tense. Old men resisted language that felt unfamiliar. Women spoke tearfully, testing the safety of their voices. Some reforms failed, others stalled, but a few, quiet, stubborn ones, took root. Marriage discussions began to include daughters. Disputes were settled with listening, not decrees. And while the shrine remained sacred, its meaning was no longer hidden behind fear alone. The oracle never spoke differently, but the people did. Nkiru in the city carried Umuaku with her like a scar and a lesson. She spoke not as a rebel, but as a witness, telling stories of how tradition could be distorted by power and how progress could become destructive when driven by contempt. She never mocked the oracle again. She explained it. She learned that the hardest truth was not that tradition needed reform, but that reform required humility. Years later, she returned. The village greeted her cautiously at first, then warmly. Children she did not recognize ran through paths she barely remembered. Mama Udo was gone, buried with honor. Obinon now sat among the elders, quieter, steadier. The chief priest was older, his back bent, but his eyes clear. He invited Nkiru to the edge of the grove, not inside, but close enough. You shook the ground, he told her, but you did not break it. Nkiru bowed her head, not in submission, but respect. I learned, she said softly, that tradition is not a wall. It is a bridge, but you cannot burn it just because you want to cross faster. That evening, as drums sounded gently across Umuaku, the oracle remained where it had always stood, wooden, silent, ancient, but no longer unquestioned and no longer abused. The elders taught the children a new proverb that year. Tradition is not a joke, but neither is change. And so Umuaku endured, not because it refused to bend, but because it learned when to listen. Final moral: African tradition is not a joke, not because it cannot be questioned, but because it carries memory, balance, and consequence. Those who challenge it must do so with wisdom, and those who guard it must do so with humility. Only then do people truly move forward.